My son lifted his glass at his 40th birthday, pretending gratitude for the family empire I built. Yet, as the candles flickered, my granddaughter leaned close and whispered, "Grandpa, leave, now." In that chilling moment, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing in on me. What I uncovered later was an unthinkable plot to strip me of the $3 million company I devoted my life to. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room that afternoon while the late sun slid across the oak floor I installed with my own hands, and I let the quiet tell the truth I had been avoiding. The old leather chair breathed when I sank into it, familiar as a work glove, familiar as the sound of Natalie's laughter when she was small. On the coffee table, I set a shoebox of receipts I had not opened in years. On top was the bursar's letter from Evans College, the one with the red stamp that said, "Paid in full." $60,000, 4 semesters in neat lines, my checks copied and paper-clipped, my notes in the margins about due dates and scholarship meetings. Beneath it lay the dealership bill of sale for his first car, a used sedan we hunted down together on a windy March afternoon. $25,000, even with tax and title, new tires thrown in because I asked twice and would not leave until the manager shook my hand. He drove that car to his first real job interview, and I remember polishing the hood in the driveway while he tied his tie in the mirror. Under the bill of sale sat a thin binder labeled Startup, the short-lived company he convinced me to help him launch. I fronted the lease deposit on a tiny office, covered his software licenses, and bought the first round of business cards with his name printed crisp in blue. I even helped him file for a small business line of credit in my name. 6 months later, the phones were silent, the chairs empty, and the binder came home to me like a failed student who could not look his teacher in the eye. I stacked these reminders one by one, and as I did, the weight pressed down harder. Each paper carried a memory of a promise made, a smile exchanged, a handshake given. Each paper also carried the quiet truth. None of it had been returned, not the money, not the gratitude, not even a word of acknowledgement. Love had written the checks. Silence had cashed them. I leaned back and let my eyes close, but the numbers did not let me rest. $75,000 went into a Miami real estate project that evaporated like mist at sunrise. Evan had shown me glossy brochures of towers of glass, families smiling by pools, gulls frozen in a blue sky. Guaranteed rental income, the salesman's voice had echoed in my kitchen, while Evan nodded like a man convinced he was already rich. I wired the money, and for months I waited for updates. Then one day the phone line disconnected. The address listed in the contract turned out to be nothing but an empty lot, and the only thing left was a stack of glossy paper curling at the edges. Not long after, it was crypto, the new gold rush, Evans swore. He showed me videos of shipping containers filled with machines humming like a million bees. $50,000 left my account for a company with a slick website, customer service that answered for a week, and then nothing. No machines, no return, just silence again. He shrugged and told me everybody gets scammed, that the next wave was coming, and this was how fortunes were built. I still hear the click of my pen when I signed that transfer, thinking I was investing in his future. The third loss was smaller in scale, but larger in lesson. $30,000 into a food truck, stainless griddle, shiny permits, and a parking spot near the courthouse. His partner had strong handshakes and better jokes, but by the end of the summer, the truck sat in a storage lot with weeds at its tires. Calls went unanswered, emails bounced. Evan called it bad luck. I called it what it was, poor judgment stacked on top of arrogance. 3 times I reached for my checkbook. 3 times I told myself this was the last time. 3 times I lied to myself because I did not want to believe my son could waste so much so easily. It was easier to say I was unlucky than to admit he was careless. I rose and walked through the house, letting my hands trail across walls I had painted, floors I had sanded. The mantel carried Linda's photo, her lace dress glowing in the silver frame, her smile steady as the day it was taken. $650,000, that is what an appraiser might call this house, but I call it a lifetime. Every board, every squeak in the staircase, every groove on the banister where Linda's rings wore the varnish soft, all of it told the story of our family. And beyond the house, upstairs in my office, sat the company I built one contract at a time, worth over $3 million now, but measured better in 40 years of honest work and trust earned by keeping my word. I built that office with a view of the maple tree because Linda liked to see the leaves change while she worked on the books. In the corner still sits the first desk we bought secondhand, scarred by cigarette burns from the man who sold it. That company, my company, is what Evan now circles like a hawk above a rabbit. He does not see the years of winters survived, the hours spent tarping roofs in the rain, or the nights spent writing bids with a tired pencil. He sees numbers, zeros, and commas. He sees a shortcut to a legacy he never earned. Standing there, I felt the cold press in, colder than the air outside, because it was the kind of cold that comes from your blood looking at you like prey. The house and the company were my heart and my hands, and now both were targets. That is what betrayal feels like when it comes from family. It is not a stranger at your door. It is someone with your eyes, your voice, your last name, aiming for the very things that hold you together. The shock from the birthday party still pulsed in me, but sitting in that living room with the receipts around me, something began to change. Hurt sits heavy, but it does not stay still forever. I could hear Linda's voice in the quiet, the way she used to speak in the passenger seat on long drives. "Walter, keep your hands steady, ignore the honking, watch the road." Her voice was soft but steady, reminding me that love is not the same as rescue, that softness is not the same as strength. I realized I had mistaken my sacrifices for proof of love, when, in truth, they had become fuel for Evan's entitlement. I remembered the night I found him at a casino table, stacks of red chips in front of him, saying it was only research. I believed him because it was easier than facing the truth. That night came back to me now with clarity, and I knew then that my tiredness had been his shield. The pain loosened its grip, and in its place came something sharper, something with edges I had forgotten I carried. Resolve. Resolve is an old pair of work boots waiting by the door, scuffed, reliable, ready. I sat straighter, breathed deeper, and told myself I would not mistake guilt for love again. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a man failing his son. I felt like a man reclaiming the ground beneath his feet. The betrayal had wounded me, yes, but it had also opened my eyes. I was not powerless. I was not empty-handed. The next step was clear, even if it would break my heart to take it. I turned toward the study and opened the file cabinet, the old metal scraping like a warning bell. Inside were the records I had kept, the paper trail of both pride and regret. College invoices with my notes, dealership bills of sale, promissory notes unsigned and forgotten, all stacked neatly because Linda believed in order. In another drawer lay the corporate records, the backbone of the company, articles of incorporation, annual minutes, insurance policies with my name as beneficiary, contracts divided by year in binders, heavy as bricks. I laid them out across the desk, each one a piece of armor. Numbers do not lie, and here was proof of every choice, every dollar, every sacrifice. I took a yellow legal pad and began writing, date by date, every check, every wire, every favor that had turned into a pattern. The page filled fast, then another, then another. By the time I set the pen down, I saw the truth staring back at me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a string of accidents. This was a life financed by me without return, a debt of gratitude unpaid, a habit that had become a noose. Running my thumb across the corporate seal, I felt steadier. This company was not built to prop up one man's fantasies. It was built to stand on its own, and I would not allow it to be stolen under the disguise of family. When the lists were made and the papers lined up, I poured coffee into a chipped mug and sat by the window where the hydrangeas Linda planted still bloomed each summer. The living room looked like a courtroom now, exhibits on every surface, sunlight turning each page into testimony. I whispered to Linda because the house had heard everything else, and it deserved this too. I should have been harder. I should have told him the truth sooner, but I will not fail you again. Saying it out loud made it real. Fear began to lose its grip. I was no longer afraid of Evan's anger, his accusations of cruelty or control. Those words do not weigh a man who has carried shingles up a ladder in August heat and tarped a roof in November rain. I know what I am. I am a builder. Builders brace walls before the storm. In that moment, I began to draw my plan. Secure the accounts. Call the bank. Call my attorney. Review the deed. Confirm the shareholder agreement. Make copies and place them somewhere safe. I had been soft, but I would not be foolish. The list felt like steel settling into place inside me. I was no longer a man reacting. I was a man preparing. Before the sun dropped, I opened the safe in the hall closet. Inside lay the marriage certificate, the life insurance policy, the titles, and the deed to this house. I pulled the deed and spread it on the desk, letting my eyes rest on the lines that named me owner. My name in ink steadied me. I checked the stock ledger of the company. 100 shares, all mine. Not out of mistrust, but out of a promise to Linda that our work would not be dragged into court by greed. I made copies of each, slipped them into a new folder, and wrote safeguards across the tab in thick black marker. The phone sat silent, waiting. I let my hand rest on it, knowing my first call would be to the bank manager who knew me by the sweat on my shirt, not by the balance in my account. The second call would be to my attorney, the man who reads everything twice and speaks slowly enough to make you listen. As the room darkened, I whispered again, "Linda, I'll do this clean. No shouting, no revenge, just truth, just steps." I placed the folder back into the safe, spun the dial, and listened for the click that meant something was shut and secure. The house exhaled. The hydrangeas shifted in the evening air. I felt a new kind of peace, not the peace of surrender, but the peace of preparation. Tomorrow I will act. Tonight I had already begun. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the sleepless night, I woke with the kind of clarity that does not apologize for itself. The house breathed around me, warm from the furnace, quiet in the way a home gets after decades of the same habits. I rinsed the coffee pot, measured grounds by feel, and stood at the sink while the kettle hissed. On the dining table, I had left everything spread out: the deed to the house, the stock ledger for my company, old invoices, canceled checks, the file of failures that told the story I never wanted to read. 40 years of sweat sat there in piles. I touched the deed and said out loud, softly, "Not today." It was not a threat. It was a promise to myself that the ground I stood on would not be given away because I was tired of fighting. Hurt had had its say. Regret had had its hour. Now it was time to move. Before 9, I called the bank and asked for Carla, the manager who remembers faces better than balances. She answered with the same steady voice she has used since the branch opened. I told her I wanted a verbal password on every account, that no wires were to be sent without my voice on the line, that the tax set aside, $230,000 in the money market, needed a hard stop if anyone tried to move it. She paused long enough for the seriousness to land, then said she understood. She said she would flag the profile, add the password, and make a note that any in-person request needed a second form of identification. I thanked her and heard my voice sounding like the man I used to be on job sites, the one who measured twice, cut once, and checked the ladder before climbing. When I hung up, the kitchen seemed to square up around me. The room had not changed. I had. I wrote the password on a card, sealed it in an envelope, and put it in the safe, because careful is not the same as afraid. I called my attorney next. We have worked together for years. He knows my habits and my stubbornness. I told him, as plainly as a man can, that I believed my son might angle for control while smiling across a birthday cake. He did not gasp or tell me I was imagining things. He said he had seen worse in quieter families. He asked me to drop by for a short meeting and to bring the stock ledger. He would draft a memo to restate shareholder restrictions, prepare a directive to the bank requiring my written consent for any transfer of company funds, and print a checklist so I could review succession steps at my own pace. We agreed on a time. When I set the receiver down, I stood still, listening to the tick of the mantel clock, that small sound of order. Calling him did not fix the damage already done, but it put nails in the frame. It reminded me that a company is not a rumor. It is paper, signatures, procedures. If Evan's ambition was leaning toward my assets, then I would shore up the walls. Evan showed up before noon with a portfolio under his arm and that restless brightness in his eyes. He did not knock. He walked in like a salesman who had sold himself the product first. He laid the portfolio on my coffee table, flipped it open, and started talking about a real estate syndicate with 15 to 20% returns, about seasoned partners, about guaranteed income streams. He used smooth words like placement memorandum and capital stack. I let him go for 3 minutes. Then I opened my folder and slid across the table a neat list of numbers copied from the night before. $60,000 for tuition, $25,000 for the car, $75,000 for Miami, $50,000 for crypto, and $30,000 for the food truck. I spoke plainly. I said, I will not invest. Not now, not later. He tried to laugh it off, called me old-fashioned, and said I was letting fear run my life. I told him fear had nothing to do with it. Facts did. He reached for a last angle, a guilt lever about family believing in family. I did not move. He gathered his portfolio with quick, sharp motions and left without closing the door behind him. The draft that slid in felt like a weather change. I went to the entryway, closed the door, and turned the deadbolt with the quiet satisfaction a man gets when he slides a lock and hears the click. The next morning, I walked down the brick path to get the paper and saw the car sitting wrong, low on all corners, like an animal curled against pain. I crouched and pressed the rubber. Soft. I ran my fingers along the sidewalls and found the punctures, small and deliberate, at just the angle that lets the air bleed slowly until morning. I stayed there a minute with my hand on the tire and the cold in my knees. I did not swear. I did not call anyone. I stood, folded the paper under my arm, and went back inside to the phone. I called for a tow. Then I called the tire place and ordered 4 replacements. When Evan rang a half hour later, he sounded surprised, concerned, and almost cheerful. He said, "Kids around here get wild. Spring break, you know." I said I did know, and I thanked him for the concern. I did not accuse him. I have learned in business and family that a man will tell you who he is if you let the silence do its job. I wrote the time of his call on a pad and set it beside the receipt when the tow truck left. Paper keeps a clearer head than anger. By early afternoon, Eleanor Brooks from next door stopped at my gate with her little dog tugging the leash. She lowered her voice the way a good neighbor does when she knows a hard truth will hurt. She said she had seen Evan the night before, bent by my car, something metallic in his hand. She had called out his name, and he had moved into the shadows. She had not wanted to get in the middle, but she could not stand quiet and watch me pay for 4 new tires without saying what she had seen. I thanked her and meant it. I told her she had done the right thing. After she left, I stood in the hallway and let the truth settle in fully. He had not just asked. He had taken a step across a line. He had chosen damage over disappointment. That realization did not shatter me. It clarified me. Some moments split a life into before and after. This was one. I wrote a short witness note in my handwriting and dated it. Then I put it with the 2 receipts because memory is not just proof. It is memory when emotions try to fog it over. That evening, I put on the navy suit Linda liked and drove to the hotel for Evan's 40th. The ballroom glowed in the way ballrooms do when someone wants the night to feel expensive. Chandeliers threw light like handfuls of coins. A row of champagne flutes stood at attention. Catered trays steamed. I stood near the back where I could see the room and the exits. People I had not seen in years shook my hand and told me how proud I must be. I said thank you because politeness costs nothing. I watched Evan work the room with Sabrina at his side, her hand sliding along his sleeve, her smile wide and photogenic. I kept my hands folded and thought about the accounts with new passwords and the directive I would sign in the morning. I thought about the deed in the safe and the stock ledger in my briefcase. In a crowd, protection can feel like secrecy, but to me, it felt like oxygen. I breathed and let the comments pass through me like wind through a screen. Sabrina took the microphone for a toast. Her dress caught the light, her voice carried, and she said the line I will remember for a long time, that Evan had proved himself even to those who never believed. She did not look at me outright, but the room did. For a second, it felt like a heat lamp turned toward my face. I could hear ice shifting in glasses. I could feel the sting that comes when your history gets rewritten in public. I wanted to lift a hand and tell them where the checks had come from, the hours, the promises, the receipts. Instead, I pictured a bubble level on a 2x4 and watched the little line settle between the marks. Keep your hands steady. Keep your ground. Let them clap. Let them drink. Then move your pieces. Natalie came to sit beside me with the quiet grace she learned from her grandmother. She did not make a scene, and she did not ask for one. She put her hand on mine and told me I did not have to stay if I did not want to. I told her I would be all right, but I asked her to keep her phone on. She nodded. That steadiness, more than the words in any toast, told me I was not crazy and I was not alone. It clicked into place. You do not argue with a level. You adjust the wall. I sat straighter and listened for the hidden music under the band's set, the rhythm of timing and plans. On my way toward the coat check, Evan intercepted me with a smile he had practiced since he was a teenager. He said he wanted to show me the renovations upstairs. He said I would appreciate the tile work. He stepped slightly to the side, inviting me toward the elevator. I told him I was tired and would admire it another time. He insisted. He said it would mean a lot. He used that tone that sounds like kindness while it narrows your options. I repeated that I was leaving. His smile thinned. He said, "Fine, Dad. Suit yourself." I walked away with the calm that comes when a man recognizes a trap from the faint shine of the bait. At the door, I told myself the truth that steadied me to the bone. They think I am beaten, but the game has only begun. Back home, I set my briefcase on the kitchen table and took out a small flash drive. I had scanned the deed, the stock ledger, the last 3 years of minutes, and the bank directives I would sign in the morning. I copied them to the drive and slid it into a small envelope with a handwritten label. If needed. I placed that envelope in the safe with the marriage certificate and the title to the house. Then I called my attorney and left a message saying I would see him at 10, that I would bring the ledger, and that I wanted him to hold a sealed note in his fireproof cabinet. My voice on the machine did not tremble. It moved at the pace of a man who knows where the stairs are, even in the dark. I set out the clothes I would wear, the folder I would carry, and the list I would follow. I wrote one line on a card and tucked it in my wallet. Control the assets. Protect the legacy. That was not anger speaking. That was the order. Sleep did not come easily, but when it did, I slept without bad dreams. At first light, I stood at the front window with coffee and watched the street wake up. A paperboy on a bike, Eleanor's porch light flicking off, a jogger passing with breath in white clouds. The house felt like itself again. The oak floor I laid when Natalie was 10 shone in the thin sun. Linda's photo on the mantel caught a sliver of light on the frame. I told her, because I still talk to her when the house is quiet, that I was done being ashamed of drawing lines. I said, "They call it hard. I call it wise." Saying it settled something in me that had rattled for years. I took the signed directive from the counter, slipped it into a large envelope, and slid the stock ledger into the briefcase with the checklist. I looked once more at the safe, spun the dial, and listened for the click that means a thing is shut that should be shut. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway long enough to hear the furnace run. A man knows his house by its sounds. House by its... Mine told me it was ready, and so was I. That is how Chapter 3 of this season in my life closed. Not with a slammed door or a shouted threat, but with a list on the counter and documents ready to be delivered. I had not fixed everything, not yet. But I had braced the frame. I had shifted from shock to structure. I had taken the first steps that a builder takes when he sees a storm gathering. Whatever celebration waited for Evan, whatever speeches Sabrina wanted to give, whatever looks a room full of strangers wanted to throw across a chandelier's glare, none of it would move what I had put in place. They did not know what papers I would hand across a desk in the morning, or what file would rest in a cabinet with my attorney's name on the label, or what small flash drive in a safe held the bones of a life's work. They would find out soon enough. For now, I set the briefcase by the door with the ledger, and I set them by the door with my keys. Quietly. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I knew the moment I stepped back into that ballroom that the air had shifted. Music played, forks chimed, someone laughed too loudly at the bar, yet a thin pressure ran under it all. Evan appeared with a fresh glass, the stem flashing like bait, and used the warm, fast voice he saves for closing. He said most guests were fine with the house Cabernet, but this was a special pour, a once-in-a-lifetime bottle. Sabrina drifted in with a smile that looked generous from across the room and calculating up close. He lifted the glass as if the night itself depended on it, and I could feel the shape of the choreography. He told me I'd appreciate the nose, the finish, the way the tannins softened after a breath. He said we needed one more toast to put a bow on the evening. He didn't say the word upstairs yet, but it hovered, a shadow in the corner of his sentences. Sabrina gestured to the hallway in a way that was supposed to look casual. My name traveled around the table like a cue. I could read the room the way a carpenter reads grain. The pressure would come from 3 angles at once. Polite encouragement, jokes about being a good sport, then the little shame that lands on a father who refuses a son on his birthday. I could see it before it happened, and still it hurt to see. I tried to set the moment back on its feet with an easy refusal. I told Evan I was pacing myself, that I had already had a glass, that my doctor had suggested I take it easy. He nodded as if he had heard me, then stepped closer and lowered his voice. He said we should finish the toast and then go upstairs so I could see the new tile in their master bath. The word upstairs landed heavily. He kept his eyes on mine while Sabrina angled her body toward the hallway. They wanted movement more than conversation. They wanted the night to narrow to a corridor and a door. I could feel Linda beside me, the way you can feel a warm stove on a winter night. "Don't go down hallways where the light doesn't touch the floor," she used to say. I had laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. Natalie saved the night in one motion. She slipped between us like a tide that looks gentle until you feel its pull, put her palm to the base of the glass, and pressed down. Wine bloomed across the cloth in a dark flower. Silence opened. "Enough," she said, steady as a level. "Grandpa doesn't need another drink." I covered the spill with a napkin and stood. Mercy is often quiet. That was mercy. Sabrina kept the smile, but her eyes went sharp. Evan's jaw worked. For a beat, we stood there like figures on a clock that had stopped. I lifted the napkin to cover the spill and rose. I said it was getting late and that I should head home. Sabrina's voice turned sweet enough to stick. She said I could not leave, not before cake, not before seeing the renovation, not before one more little toast for family. Evan chuckled and told the table that the tile would make me jealous. The word jealous sat there like a bad joke. Natalie's fingers found the cuff of my coat. She did not pull. She held. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice, and that is what changed the shape of the night. "Grandpa, leave here, now." I have learned to trust quiet warnings. They usually come without applause, and they are the ones that save your life. I slipped into my coat. Evan shifted a half step to block me, still smiling, still selling. He said 5 minutes, that was all, just 5 minutes, and then I could go. I told him 5 minutes seemed to be what people asked for before they asked for everything else. He blinked like I had spoken a different language. Sabrina told the nearest guests I was tired. Long day, the kind of line that lets a crowd decide it has seen kindness. I stepped around my son and walked toward the door. The band kept playing. The chandelier kept shining. But when the hotel door opened and the cool night air hit my face, the evening changed shape again, and this time in my favor. The air outside had a clean honesty I had not felt inside all evening. Under the awning, I called a taxi and watched my breath hang white in the hotel's amber light. Through the glass, I saw Evan and Sabrina confer, motions quick, timing tight. The driver pulled up, and I slid into the back seat. My phone buzzed before we reached the corner. Natalie's name filled the screen, and I answered. She asked if I was safe. I said I was. I asked her to tell me everything and to speak calmly. She said she had overheard her parents in the kitchen the day before, that Sabrina had said there would be lawyers upstairs and papers laid out on the guest room bed, that once I had enough wine, I would sign anything if it meant making Evan happy. She said she heard the words transfer, power of attorney, and stock. She said Sabrina had told the caterer not to let me near the stairs until after the toast. "Grandpa," she said, "they were going to get you to sign tonight." The heater blew across my hands, but my chest went cold. It was not the shock of discovery, it was the confirmation that settles into your ribs and stays there. I asked if she had seen the lawyers. She said 2 men with briefcases had arrived early and gone up before dinner. She said her mother kept checking her watch and that Evan kept glancing at the hallway like a man waiting for a signal. I thanked her and told her to stay in her room, to lock her door, and to keep her phone on. She said she would. I ended the call and put the back of my head against the cab's seat and looked at the cab ceiling. The anger in me tempered into heat I could use. I spoke to the dark window as if Linda were beside me. They think I am weak. They think I am tired. They are about to learn otherwise. I dialed the bank's after-hours line and left a message for Carla that was more a record than a plea. Effective immediately, no wires, no account changes, no checks above $2,000 without my voice and our password on the line. I named the accounts by their last 4 digits. I mentioned the money market with $230,000 earmarked for taxes. I told the machine I would be in first thing to sign whatever she put in front of me that would make my instructions iron. Next, I called my attorney and left a message that did not waste a syllable. Something is moving tonight. I am safe. In the morning, I want to file a restatement of transfer restrictions and hand our bank a corporate resolution that any change in ownership or control requires my notarized signature and board consent. I will bring the stock ledger and our amended buy-sell agreement. First thing. I hung up and felt steadier. Sometimes the cure for fear is a list and a pen. At home, I went to the hall closet, spun the safe dial, and pulled the accordion folder that carries the bones of my life. The deed, the marriage certificate, the articles of incorporation, the insurance policy, the buy-sell. Linda and I signed after one of Evan's early schemes put a tremor in my hands. I laid the buy-sell on the kitchen table and read by the overhead light that hums when it warms up. Section 9, Paragraph 3, written in my attorney's careful language, required capacity and notarization for any transfer and barred any signature obtained under duress. Section 10 required board action by written consent for any change of control. Section 12 gave the company a right of first refusal and a 48-hour cooling-off period for any sale. In other words, even if they had marched me upstairs and put a pen in my hand, the ink would not have meant what they hoped it meant. I smiled then, not out of meanness, but out of relief. We had built a fence years ago for a danger we had not yet met. Tonight we met it, and the fence held. I printed the pages twice and highlighted the paragraphs with yellow. One set went into a new folder labeled Safeguards. On the tab, I wrote, in my hand, "No one signs for me. No one speaks for me." Unknown numbers began to bloom on the phone, then Evan, then Sabrina. I let each one die. A text tried offense, then concern, then threat. Paper did not flinch. Neither did I. Natalie called again. Her voice was quieter now. She said she had gone to her room. She said her mother had knocked twice and asked where I had gone and if she had said anything to me. She said her father's footsteps were fast and heavy in the upstairs hall. In the background, I heard Sabrina say they could salvage it if I returned before midnight. Evan said, "It's over. He knows." I told Natalie she had already done the bravest part. I told her to let the noise pass by her door like the wind. She said she would. I told her I was proud of her, the kind of proud that lives in your chest and keeps you warm in winter. I wrote 2 letters at the kitchen table. The first went to Evan and Sabrina by email and certified mail. I stated that any signature obtained under the influence or pressure would be treated as fraud, attached the buy-sell with the capacity clause highlighted, and reminded them that 100 issued shares cannot move without board action and a notary. The second went to Carla and the bank's general counsel, memorializing my voicemail and listing account numbers, limits, and the password. I printed copies for my file. I am not the kind of man who makes a scene in public. I am the kind who keeps records in order. When the ink dried, I walked through the house, checked the back door, the garage entry, and the kitchen windows. I turned on the porch light so Eleanor would see it and know I was up. In the living room, I told Linda what the night had tried to be and what it became instead. We had not built this life to be hustled in a hallway. I slid the new folder into the safe and listened for the click. Just before dawn, I showered, shaved, and put on the navy suit that had carried me through funerals, contracts, and one impossible winter. At 8:45, I sat across from Carla in her glass-walled office with the fern and the brochure about retirement tilted in its holder. She had already printed what I asked for. We added the password to each account profile. We lowered daily limits. We flagged the money market so it could not move without me sitting in a chair across from a banker with 2 forms of ID and a notary. We reviewed small details, someone's middle initial, a mailing address, and then she placed her pen on the desk like a gavel. "You're buttoned up," she said. I thanked her and told her I would bring cookies next week. She said she preferred oatmeal raisin. We laughed like ordinary people, which felt like a gift. From the bank, I drove to my attorney's office, a square brick building that smells faintly of lemon oil. He read the buy-sell, the ledger, my affidavit, and the email to my son. He nodded once and dictated without drama. We executed a board action by written consent, requiring my notarized signature for any transfer, pledge, or encumbrance. We drafted a letter to the bank confirming that no corporate instruction would be honored without me present with ID and a notary. He slid pages across the table. I signed. The paper had weight again. Halfway through, my phone buzzed across the polished table. Evan, then Sabrina, then an unknown number, likely one of the waiting lawyers. My attorney suggested we return one call on speaker so there would be no confusion later. We finished the signatures. I said I was ready. He pressed the speaker button and returned Evan's call. My son answered in a rush that sounded like someone trying to outrun his own words. He said I had embarrassed him. He said people were talking. He said I was making a mountain out of a family misunderstanding. I let him tire himself before I spoke. Then I told him where I was and what we had signed. I told him any attempt to transfer or pledge stock or to direct the bank in any way would be treated as fraud. I told him that if he wanted a conversation about legitimate succession planning, it would happen in a proper meeting, sober, with minutes and with counsel present. If he tried to ambush me again, he would meet a different kind of meeting. For a moment, the line held nothing, not even breath. Then his voice cracked and slid into anger. He said I could not do this to him. He said he had worked too hard to be humiliated by his father. He said Sabrina had only been trying to honor me. He said lawyers had been upstairs for something else entirely. I looked at my attorney and saw in his eyes the same thing I felt in my chest, the end of a story I had told myself for too long. "No," I said. "The game you staged is over. There is nothing left to explain." He started another sentence and then hung up. The silence that followed was clean. We sent the letters. The cease and desist went by email and certified mail. The board consent went to the registered agent. The bank letter went by courier. My attorney copied the voicemail to the file and added my affidavit to the index. When I stood, he said I was ahead of the storm. I told him that was the plan. On my way out, I noticed the brass plate by his door that says what the law often needs to say aloud, truth stated plainly. I took the long way home along the river. The water slid around rocks with a patience I have always admired. At the house, I set the signed documents on the dining table and opened the safe. The new folder slid in beside the deed and the marriage certificate. I spun the dial and listened for the click. In the quiet that followed, the furnace came on and the vents breathed warm air. For the first time in days, I felt hunger. I made a sandwich and ate it at the counter like a man who has earned his lunch. Late afternoon brought more calls I did not answer. Evan left a voicemail that tried 3 shapes in 1 minute: apology, accusation, plea. He said I had been unfair. He said people would gossip about a father who could not celebrate his son. He said he loved me. He said I should show that I loved him. Then he said if I kept this up, I would force his hand. He did not say what that hand would do, and I did not ask either. Sabrina's message followed. She used the word miscommunication so smoothly that it almost sounded like the truth. She said family should trust family. She said last night had gotten away from everyone. She said they wanted to correct any wrong notes. Her tone was honey over gravel. I saved both messages without comment. At dusk, Natalie texted to say she was home safe. She wrote that her parents had argued about timing and witnesses and a lost opportunity. She sent a small heart and told me to rest if I could. I stared at the little heart until it blurred and then told myself out loud in the empty kitchen that we were fine and that they were wrong. Some words you say for the record inside your chest. The night grew quiet the way old houses do after the last light clicks off. I sat with Linda's photograph and told her the part of the story that mattered most to me. Not the wine, not the corridor, not the lawyers upstairs. The part that mattered was that I had not wavered when it counted. I had listened to our granddaughter. I had trusted my instincts. I had chosen paper and daylight over hurry and dim hallways. They thought I was soft, I said. They learned I was steady. The word steady felt like a beam set straight. Morning arrived without fanfare. I stood at the window and watched the maple throw small shadows on the lawn. I poured coffee and opened my laptop. An email from Carla sat in the inbox with the subject line, Confirmation. Her language did not sing. It stood. All accounts are restricted as instructed. No deviations permitted without your in-person verification and password. I replied with 2 words, thank you, and closed the lid. Relief does not always shout. Sometimes it hums in the baseboards and makes coffee taste like coffee again. I carried 3 large envelopes to the table and wrote names in a steady hand across each one. People who had once tied their money to Evan's promises would soon receive copies of what I had collected. I did not seal the envelopes yet. Timing matters, but this time the timing would be mine. I stacked them neatly and set a smooth river stone on top that Linda had picked up on a vacation long ago. A weight to keep intention from drifting. In the afternoon, I walked the property line down along the hydrangeas that sleep low this time of year and up the fence where, years ago, I taught Evan to drive nails without bending them. I let myself remember the boy who looked up at me like the world made sense when I explained it. Then I let the memory go, not because I stopped loving him, but because I had to love my own life enough to protect it. Love does not ignore a fire. Love finds the extinguisher and pulls the pin. Evening settled. The porch light came on with a click so soft You feel it more than hear it. I poured a glass of water and sat in the quiet. Across town, I imagined a notary put away his stamp and 2 lawyers closed their briefcases with a sigh. An upstairs trap had dissolved into witnesses with nothing to witness. Here, at my table, a plan had turned into paper with weight. That is what justice looks like sometimes. Not a shout. A folder with a tab that says exactly what it holds. I ended the day the way I like to end any honest day. I checked the locks, felt the safe door once, and turned out the lights. The furnace hummed, the house breathed, the street settled. Before bed, I whispered to Linda that we were steady, and that the worst of the storm had passed without tearing the roof. Tomorrow would bring consequences. The day after would bring choices. I would be ready for both, and they would not like what readiness looks like on a man who finally remembers his strength. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the long night of signatures and letters, I woke earlier than usual. The air in the house carried a different weight, lighter, as if some shadow had finally lifted. The folder of documents still sat on the dining table where I had left it, neat and square like a sentinel guarding my peace. For the first time in years, I drank my coffee without rushing, without that ache of dread under my ribs. The storm had broken, and what remained was the work of clearing the branches it left behind. By noon, I had mailed the first set of packets. Each one carried the story Evan had tried to bury, stories I had kept locked away in drawers for decades. I had written a short note for each, calm and professional, attaching the records of his failed ventures, unpaid debts, and broken contracts. Marcus Cole, who had lost nearly $80,000 in one of Evan's schemes. Daniel Ruiz, who had been strung along with promises of land that never materialized. And Jennifer Hale, who had invested her retirement savings in what Evan had called the safest deal of her life. I wrote to each of them not as an angry father, but as a fellow victim who had finally decided to speak. I told them I was sharing documents they had a right to see, that the truth had been hidden too long. I sealed the envelopes, pressed the flaps until they held, and walked them down to the post office myself. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted tracking. I said yes, I wanted proof that every word arrived where it should. As I walked back to the car, a cool wind swept the street, carrying the smell of wet leaves and gasoline from a truck idling nearby. I breathed it in as if to remind myself that life goes on in ordinary ways even when your life tilts. Later that afternoon, I sent another package, this one digital. Sabrina had spent years cultivating her image at the consulting firm where she worked, speaking of integrity and efficiency while smiling through boardrooms. I knew enough to understand that image mattered more than substance in her world. I also knew about the ethics office her firm had, the one that promised to investigate conflicts of interest or abuses of position. I typed slowly, reviewing each line, stripping away anger until only the facts remained. Anonymous, I said. Documents attached show financial impropriety connected to employee Sabrina Hale, suspicious use of family accounts, evidence of attempted coercion regarding ownership transfers. Please review in confidence. When I pressed send, the screen went blank for a second, then refreshed. The email was gone, launched into the current of corporate systems that live and die by appearances. I closed the laptop and sat back. Sometimes the simplest acts, a walk to the post office, a click of a button, are the sharpest blows in a battle. News traveled fast. Within 2 days, Marcus called me. He did not sound angry. He sounded alive, like a man who had been waiting for this moment. He thanked me, said the documents explained everything he had suspected. He promised he would not let it rest. Daniel wrote back by letter, his handwriting still steady, despite his age. He said he would finally warn others that he would no longer be silent. Jennifer sent an email, curt but powerful. The truth matters. You've given it back to us. Evan must have felt the walls closing in. The calls started again, this time frantic, one after another, until I stopped looking at the phone. I heard from others, too. A neighbor said Evan had been asked to step away from a local real estate club. An old acquaintance told me word was spreading online that people were comparing stories and finding patterns. For a man who lived by other people's money and other people's confidence, the loss of both was not just painful, it was ruin. Sabrina's unraveling came quieter but sharper. I heard from Natalie, who overheard her mother whispering in the kitchen about an internal investigation, about meetings with HR that stretched into hours. The company had pulled her from client-facing work. Rumors of suspension circled. She had built her reputation on control, and now she could not even control the whispers at her own office. One evening, just before dinner, headlights swept across my driveway. A hard knock followed. When I opened the door, Evan and Sabrina stood there. Their faces told two different stories. He was twisted with anger, his mouth tight, his hands fisted in his jacket pockets. Hers was pale, her lipstick smudged, her eyes darting as if looking for an escape even before a word was spoken. "You've destroyed us," Evan said, his voice hoarse. "You've poisoned people against me, against us. You didn't just stop me, you ruined me." I let him talk. He listed names, shouted about investors who had stopped returning his calls, about friends who had dropped him, about bills piling up. He accused me of revenge, of wanting to shame him, of playing God with his life. His words bounced in the hallway, bitter and wild. Sabrina tried to add her defense, softer but no less desperate. She said I had misunderstood, that everything was meant to protect the family, that the lawyers upstairs were only for estate planning. I walked to the table where I had placed copies of the documents I had sent. Slowly, I set them down in front of them. The failed partnerships, the unpaid notes, the attempts at coercion, all in black and white. I looked my son in the eye, steady, and said, "This is not revenge. This is the truth. You built your life on lies, and truth doesn't need my help to destroy it. It does that on its own." He stared at the pages, his face flushing. For a moment he seemed ready to argue again, but the words slipped. His shoulders sagged. He lowered himself into a chair as if the weight of the paper had pushed him down. Sabrina, standing beside him, covered her mouth, her voice breaking as she whispered, "They're investigating me. They'll fire me." Her hands trembled, and for the first time, she did not look calculating. She looked afraid. I felt no joy in watching them collapse. A father does not dream of this moment. But I felt no guilt either. I had protected what I built, I had protected myself, and I had honored the warning of the only one who had stood by me. When they left, the door shut with a final sound. The house grew quiet again, and in that quiet I found something I had not felt in years. Peace. Natalie came by the next day. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded, her eyes tired from the storm she had lived through. I told her everything, every step I had taken. She listened, nodding, sometimes wiping at her eyes. When I finished, I reached across the table and held her hands. "You saved me," I told her. "You saw what they were doing, and you spoke up. That took courage. More courage than I've seen in years. I promise you this. Whatever happens, your future will be safe. I'll make sure of it." She squeezed my hand and whispered, "I just didn't want them to hurt you." In that moment, I knew what family truly meant. Not blood alone, not shared names or dinners or photographs. Family is the one who protects you when others betray you. Family is the one who risks their place to keep you safe. The days that followed grew quieter. Evan and Sabrina stopped calling. Neighbors told me they had seen the two of them fighting in the driveway late at night. Someone mentioned they had put their house on the market, whispers of debts chasing them. I did not ask for details. Whatever happened to them now was no longer my concern. As for me, I began to rediscover simple things. Mornings with coffee by the window, afternoons walking by the river, evenings with Natalie visiting, sometimes bringing over soup she had tried cooking, sometimes just sitting with me in the silence that felt like balm. I opened the piano in the living room, dusted the keys, and let my fingers stumble through the old songs. They did not sound perfect, but they sounded honest, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the maple outside threw red shadows on the lawn, I stood on the porch and whispered to myself, "I am free." The words felt solid. They belonged. I know Evan and Sabrina live now in a small rented condo across town. Their old friends don't visit. Sabrina still fights to keep her job, though I hear the investigation has not ended. Evan talks of starting over, but no one listens anymore. They live in the shadow of the choices they made, and I live in the light of the choices I finally claimed. If they call again someday, begging forgiveness, I may answer, but I will not let them back into my life. Forgiveness is one thing, trust is another, and trust, once shattered, does not rebuild itself. I remind myself often of the lesson I learned. Blood does not excuse betrayal. Respect, honesty, loyalty, those are the true bonds of family. Real family never tricks you, I whispered one night as I closed the safe with the folder of documents. They protect you. The house feels lighter now. I keep fresh flowers on the table, something Linda always loved. I walk each morning with a clearer step. The phone no longer rules my mood. My hands, once trembling, are now steady as I cook eggs or mend a loose hinge. Natalie laughed the other day when she saw me carrying groceries by myself, insisting she could help. I told her I had strength yet, that I had proved it. She hugged me and said, "Grandpa, you're stronger than all of them." I believed her. I don't need Evan's approval. I don't need Sabrina's schemes. I don't need to defend myself to those who traded love for greed. I have myself, my dignity, and the granddaughter who stood firm. That is enough. More than enough. As I sit here tonight, the papers locked safe, the house quiet, I feel that rare sense of completion. The battle is over. The truth has won. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I will walk into town and sign up for the local community center's volunteer group. They've been asking for retired folks to help with meal deliveries. I think I am ready. Ready to give without fear, ready to live without the weight of betrayal. The story that tried to break me is finished, but the life that waits beyond it is just beginning. The mornings in my new home have a gentleness I had almost forgotten. I wake to the sound of birds outside the window, sunlight spilling across the modest living room. The condo isn't large, but it is mine, and more importantly, it is peaceful. I brew coffee slowly, letting the smell fill the air, then step outside for a short walk. The park down the street has become my refuge. I nod at the same faces each morning, people walking their dogs or stretching before work. There is comfort in this simple rhythm, comfort in knowing I am free. Natalie often joins me on weekends. She laughs when she sees the stack of books by my armchair, teasing me that I finally have time to read all the novels I once ignored. We cook dinner together sometimes, nothing fancy. Pasta, a roast chicken, and vegetables from the market. The house fills with the warmth of food, conversation, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. For the first time in years, my home feels safe again. I still hear whispers about Evan and Sabrina. They moved into a cramped rental on the far side of town. The neighbors there don't know their history, but word travels quickly. Evan's business ventures collapsed one after another. No one trusts him with money anymore. Sabrina lost her job and has been piecing together part-time work. I was told they tried to host friends once, but hardly anyone showed up. Their circle has shrunk to nearly nothing. That is the life they built for themselves, and I no longer carry the weight of it. One evening, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. I recognized Evan's handwriting instantly. My hand trembled as I held it, not from fear, but from the finality of the moment. I opened it and read his words, apologies, excuses, promises that he had changed. For a moment, I sat in silence, letting the past whisper through my thoughts. Then I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it away in a drawer. I whispered to myself, I don't need their apology. I have my life. That was the end of it. As days turned into weeks, I found joy in something new. I joined a volunteer group at the community center. We packed meals for seniors, delivered groceries, and sometimes just sat and listened. It reminded me of what family should be: people who care, people who show up without an agenda. Every smile I saw, every thank you I received, strengthened the lesson I had learned. For parents, I see the truth now. Love your children, but do not surrender your dignity. Boundaries protect the heart. For children, the lesson is heavier. Betray your parents for money, and you lose a treasure far greater than wealth, their trust. And for all of us, in a world rushing with greed, the only inheritance that matters is character. Tonight I sit in my armchair, the garden outside glowing in the dusk. I murmur, the only thing the story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again. All that matters is dignity, and that no one can take from me.